Welcome to the EchoCast, a podcast about video game news, speculation, rumors, and reviews. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week I'll be covering more Baldur's Gate 3 news, Modern Warfare 3 announced, the Division 2 Year 5 thoughts, and much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment with your thoughts, questions for next week, or to just say hello. A special thank you to all of my patrons, including producer level patrons Hassan and Horseman, supporter level patrons PK, The Dawn, Cage Nephilim, and Neuronix, and viewer level patron Zenra. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 per month, please check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. This week we have 8 topics. Topic number 1, let's get into more Baldur's Gate 3 news. I kind of want to just give my continued impressions of the game. I kind of did a review of sorts last week, even though I still haven't finished the game. I did want to, kind of give my further impressions, talk about kind of where I'm at this point, and I'm still really impressed. So I have a character, my main character, my first character, who I've gotten into Act 3. There's 3 acts total in this game, and I still think the first act, it just shows, it really looks like they spent 3 years in early access, and then obviously multiple years before that developing the game. Act 2 and 3, or Act 2, which I have completed, is really good and has some really good moments and is really interesting, but isn't quite as long, isn't quite as thick, but it's still pretty fun. I'm only getting into Act 3, and it's still great. I have seen, though, some sentiment from other players that Act 3, definitely feels like the one that got the least amount of attention, and that the endings maybe aren't as satisfying as everyone wishes they were. And that shouldn't be that surprising, right? They spent, they got direct fan feedback on the first act for years. And then, beyond that, they've just been, trying to take those lessons and apply them to Act 2 and 3. But no feedback is as good as the feedback that is actually on the content. So I don't think it's going to hurt the legacy or the ratings. Obviously, reviews are starting to roll in from some of the bigger outlets, which and the Metacritic score has only gone up. I think last week I reported it was 94. It's now 97 with 14 reviews. I would expect that review number to double or so at least, and that Metacritic score will probably drop a little. It's currently 1 point ahead of Tears of the Kingdom. I suspect it will end up probably getting down to about 95, which is like nothing to scoff at, nothing to not be impressed by. It's still wildly just awesome. And I think, obviously I still think this game should be in the Game of the Year conversation. It's the one game so far that seems like it should legitimately challenge. I personally preferred the Jedi Survivor up until Baldur's Gate 3. This game has taken over my number 1 spot at this point, even though I do expect it to be surpassed by Starfield. We'll see. Maybe Starfield's going to be a big dud. I don't think it's going to be. I still think with Starfield, it's guaranteed to be a really good game. It has potential to be an amazing game, and so we'll have to see about that. But we have Baldur's Gate 3. It's already an amazing game as far as we can tell. Unfortunately, and I think I may have mentioned this last week, I've noticed that, following the Baldur's Gate 3 subreddit and kind of getting involved in that community just a little bit, mostly so I could try to like learn more about the game and get some kind of tips and thoughts from people who have been playing this kind of game for a really long time. I remember right after the game released, it already started popping up with people being like real weird about any feedback given that wasn't like 100% praising Baldur's Gate 3. And I understand that, especially people who are in early access have been playing this game for 3+ years, that they're very invested in it. They've watched it grow and change and improve. And so, they don't want anyone even potentially talking bad about their baby, right? The issue that I've noticed is that there was a weird sentiment of like, there were devs who were coming out and saying things like, this game's amazing, but maybe not every studio is going to be able to do this, and various versions of that. And it had like such weird vibes to me because, this is a game that I think everyone expected it to be good, at least the sentiment I got around it. And then before release, you started seeing some people being like, hey, this game might be like a really big deal. And then it came out and it's a really big deal. And it's interesting that, I saw this take pop up here and there on the subreddit of doing this whole like, this dev is scared of Baldur's Gate 3, and then you would go read the tweet or whatever, and they would just kind of be like, given their perspective as a dev, generally being very positive about Baldur's Gate, and then maybe being like, yeah, this is going to be hard for other, teams to replicate for whatever reason. Whether it's because the game, like comparing Starfield to Baldur's Gate 3, like there's things that Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have to worry about doing that Starfield does. And so, some of that development focus and resources are going to go other places. That may mean that Starfield may have parts of, some of the genre defining features of these RPG type games. Maybe it will have areas where it's not as good as Baldur's Gate 3. But it also will probably have other areas where it's better. And, and that's the push and pull of game development. And so, I saw a lot of these, some of these devs coming out and saying, I thought some pretty innocent stuff, basically just giving their perspective on their experience and things like that. I follow a ton of devs, mostly Ubisoft devs, EA devs, specifically like Mass Effect and Dragon Age devs, who I think would be in the pool of people who would potentially be the most scared of this game, who all seem like hyper positive about it, super excited about it, super inspired by Baldur's Gate 3. And then there's the other issue of that Baldur's Gate 3 isn't perfect. Like I said before, like as you get into the acts, Act 2 and especially 3, the facade starts to crumble a little bit. It's the romances are, the romance, at least that I've pursued, is great. But it's really just like a step past the old Mass Effect romances and stuff. It's not, genre, groundbreaking stuff. It's just a little more complicated. It has a little more content, a little more reactivity. But it's not like it's this like AI system that's generating original responses for every single time you interact with your romance or with anyone else. It's these fairly canned responses, and you can run out of things for them to say. And, it's very good, but it's not like taking the world by storm or, I think it is genre defining in some capacity. But in a lot of small steps, where I think some people are kind of drinking the juice a little too much and acting like Baldur's Gate 3 is this like revolution in gaming, and it probably isn't, but it's like very good, and it probably will make gaming, especially RPGs, better in the long run. This kind of culminated this week in IGN putting out a video by Dustin Bam Laguerre, who, full disclosure, I've watching IGN's Xbox podcast, which I actually at one point really liked a lot. I've never really vibed with Dustin. I think that he's I don't know. I just don't vibe with him. He's just not my my type of dude. And he did this video where I think the headline annoys me more than anything, that IGN's been pushing really hard and doing this, like, developers are panicking over Baldur's Gate 3. And it's just like, it implies that like every developer, especially of RPG games, is like devastated and panicked and can't handle that maybe Baldur's Gate 3 has, you know, set expectations for RPGs a little bit higher, when that's just not the case. That's false. Now, if you actually watch the video, he focuses in on this tweet thread by a developer I've never heard of, from a studio I've never heard of, who I think is making VR games. So not to diminish people who make VR games, but I think that if you want to be mad about something, especially on social media and Twitter, if you want to find a take that maybe isn't popular or isn't the general opinion of a large group of people, but you want to find an opinion to get mad about, you can do that very easily on Twitter. And that kind of seems like what happened here. In my opinion, this was very cherry picked. Now, this particular thread did get quote tweeted and shared by a decent number of devs and people in the industry. But what I noticed is that it's actually ended up being shared and spread more by people criticizing it than people agreeing with it, even though there have been some of those. And so the whole idea is that this dev basically was saying that, you know, one, they were very positive about Baldur's Gate 3. It's not like, I've definitely seen some implying that the dev was, you know, trying to tear down Baldur's Gate 3 or Larian and stuff like that. I've not seen that from anyone. The only pushback I've seen is people kind of pushing back on the idea that Larian is this like little mom and pop studio that is just barely making it, when that's just not true. They're a arguably AAA sized and resourced studio that just happens to not have a publisher. Now that does obviously make funding and stuff a little more complicated, but they seem to be doing just fine. But this video that Dustin gets into is it really focuses in on this one tweet thread from this dev who was like moderately, you know, kind of pushing back on like, you know, this is going to be tough for all game devs to match this exact formula that Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian is showing. And then some of the quote tweets are supportive, some weren't. And this video just kind of focuses in on that. And it's just like, my issue with it is that it really, in my opinion, tried to imply that like every studio and every dev is like peeing their pants over this game, and that they just will never be able to do it. And then the sentiment that, and I assume this video Destin made it after looking at the subreddit and seeing some of these, I would say, are arguably really stupid takes, and like almost like purposeful misunderstandings of what some of these devs were saying about this. It really came off as like victim complex stuff to me in the subreddit. And then it kind of seems like Destin picked up on that and decided to do a video pushing that kind of attitude. And then kind of hilariously, after a lot of pushback, a lot of devs, the same ones who I found that seemed very inspired by Baldur's Gate 3, who seemed to really be enjoying it, I saw a bunch of them quote tweeting this IGN video and being like, this isn't true. Like, we aren't panicking, you know, this is awesome. Like what they've done is great. And Destin has, his responses have been really funny, where he's been saying like, everyone wants me to lower my standards for games, but I refuse, kind of stuff. It's like, okay, bro, like maybe let's tone down the self-righteousness here and maybe realize that you just wrote kind of a clickbaity sensational article that misrepresented the opinions of an entire group of people who have very diverse and unique opinions. I don't know. The whole saga kind of annoyed me, and the whole sentiment of like this like this like victim complex that a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 fans were having, and this kind of like intentionally misconstruing the words and tweets and such of a bunch of developers to kind of try to do this whole like they're all against us kind of thing. It's like it wasn't real. And then now Destin made a whole video kind of pushing that take. And now we're in this situation where, because if you look in the replies of this video and stuff, like, there are just a bunch of people being like, oh yeah, AAA devs suck, they can't do anything right, and they're scared of Larian. It's like, that's not true. And the most annoying part is that IGN and Destin specifically should know, and maybe fans don't, maybe people in the subreddit just don't understand how these things work well enough, but Destin does, and IGN certainly does. Whoever his editor is and whoever approved this project, they know that the real problem are publishers. Devs don't want to make bad games. And even the management on the studio side, like, maybe they are a little more corporate, but they still don't want to make bad games, and they don't want to put out incomplete games, incomplete games, buggy games, all of that stuff. But publishers control everything. They control the money, which is where everything begins. And so if a publisher wants to put in some stupid, live service stuff that the developers never intended and never designed the game around, it's going to happen. If they want to put in a bunch of microtransactions, even though the game wasn't intended to have them, it's going to happen. If the publisher wants the game to come out early or before it's ready, and it's buggy and it's a hot mess, it's going to happen. And so it really, I think more than anything, bums me out that Destin had an opportunity to take this sentiment of, like, we should expect more, which is fair, but he put the focus on devs instead of studios. And I think that's the biggest problem. And, and not even studios, but publishers. And the publishers, are kind of the problem, it seems like. And if you pay attention to enough devs and stuff like that, you'll definitely get that feeling, even from people who work for them. One of my good examples of this is that, like, Ubisoft catches a lot of crap. They make a lot of bad decisions. They make a lot of bad games. They haven't put out, like, a real banger game in quite a while. But I would still be willing to say that Ubisoft probably has some of the most talented devs in the entire industry. It's a huge company. The publisher owns, I think they probably have 20 plus studios still. And a few of those studios especially are, like, supremely talented. But all of them have talent, right? And it's, none of these games come out and none of these games get developed to be bad. And, as someone myself who's a big Division fan, and I've gotten to know a lot of the devs and over the years have had a lot of conversations that really lead you to believe, like, oh man, like, and maybe it's just them talking, but I believe them definitely more than I believe a publisher. And you get all of these stories and all of these situations that you hear about where the team, needed more time or had this cool idea or didn't want to put in this feature and it wasn't up to them. And I think, I just think this is basically a big issue of just ignorance of fans not understanding how these things work and who's really in charge of what. And I only fault fans to a point. I think every fan could be more educated, more knowledgeable if they spent more time learning about how these things work. But really my beef is with, a long time respected, very experienced, I'm sure very knowledgeable journalist who should be above clickbaity sensational content, and especially should be above than pretending to be like this, like, ultra victim in the situation. But that's not what happened. It's out there now. I've complained about it enough. Hopefully I'm done even thinking about it. Let's move on. Story number 2, Modern Warfare 3 has been officially announced. It's coming out later this year. I'm sure they're going to be doing their smattering of story videos and gameplay videos over the next few months. The big thing here is that they are pushing really hard this idea that Modern Warfare 3 is basically just going to be like, it's going to carry over a lot of Modern Warfare 2 stuff. And it's really interesting because, they didn't do that with the 2019 Modern Warfare to Modern Warfare 2. And it's, I love how they're kind of selling this as a positive, but what they're also kind of acknowledging is that, like, this is basically like a multiplayer expansion, and we're going to add a new story, and it's going to be $70. for the base version, and probably $90 for the deluxe, and then probably like $120 for some master version or whatever. So I'm a sucker. I will likely end up being someone who buys this just to basically play this the single player campaign, though depending on how things go with the acquisition with Xbox and ABK, I may try to actually hold off and wait until this does eventually come to Game Pass, because I'm kind of burned out on Call of Duty multiplayer. I always enjoy playing it for a couple weeks, and then I kind of get tired of it. It's what I did with Modern Warfare 2. I've never gotten into the big multiplayer mode. I just Warzone. I don't like it. I don't like the way it feels. It's just like too chaotic for my ADHD brain. I did like DMZ. It kind of got old quick. It didn't feel like you were really progressing towards anything. Even though it is kind of like a Tarkov light, which I did enjoy a lot from it. It just never really grabbed me, but I'm excited for the Modern Warfare 3 story. I found the story in the 2019 Modern Warfare and then Modern Warfare 2 to be great. There were some moments during that Modern Warfare 2 campaign that were just like so fun, really, really a blast. And I expect the same from this one. So not really hitting on the super hype train for me, but is what it is. Okay, story number 3, Rockstar is hiring external team. So there's kind of this interesting story where you can tell Rockstar is kind of gearing up for Grand Theft Auto 6, likely in the next year or two. And it seems like part of that was for them to acquire a role-playing server group called CFX.re. Now, I'm going to be straight up, and I'm going to admit a ton of ignorance with Grand Theft Auto 5, especially with Grand Theft Auto Online, and especially with the role-playing side of this. But my impression is and one of the interesting things about this story is that it seems like this group, or at least the owners of it, were actually banned like back in 2015 from Grand Theft Auto Online because they were, exploiting or modifying the game against the user agreement. This story is kind of interesting though, because now they've kind of come full circle in how they work for Rockstar, which I'm sure that at least some of their community probably thinks that they're kind of sellouts. But at the same time, at the end of the day, when it comes to, if you have like a hobby or like something that you just like to do and you can turn that into your job, I'll rarely find hate for that unless it's done with toxicity. But this to me just implies that it seems like Rockstar recognizes the popularity of the role-playing stuff. I forget which group it is, but there's there is a role-playing server where it's like legitimately like pretty well-known content creators and stuff like that. It's like invite only, and it has like really, really strict rules that like you can't break character, and like if you do, you get kicked out of the server. Like it's a big deal. And to get into this server is a big deal. Like if you get in, you're pretty much guaranteed at least like a pretty solid viewer base on Twitch and stuff like that, because people want to see what's going on in this server, and it's relatively limited. And so I have no interest in any of this stuff. I'll throw out a hot take that might make some people mad. I didn't like Grand Theft Auto 5. I thought it sucked. I didn't. I get that the characters, like I love Grand Theft Auto 4 and 3 and Vice City and all of those. San Andreas was just like one of my favorite games ever. But it's because all of those characters, like they were kind of pieces of crap, but like they still had endearing moments and endearing parts of them. And I just never felt that about any of the characters in Grand Theft Auto 5. And I hated switching between characters. I just want to play as one person. Like I don't, it felt like such a gimmick to me. And then they made the one dude so unlikable, and really all three of them kind of stunk. And I don't know. I never like just got into it, which was weird because I typically love everything Rockstar puts out, even though I've definitely begun to lean more toward the Red Dead series. Anyways, this acquisition seems like they do recognize the importance of this, And it seems like they're going to try to do their own kind of baked in role playing stuff now, as Grand Theft Auto 6 approaches relatively quickly. Okay, story number 4. Star Wars Outlaws had a fan kit release. So, this is kind of, it was kind of a slow week, if you want me to be totally honest. So we have a bunch of listener questions that will actually probably be even more interesting, but here we go. So this Star Wars Outlaws fan kit was actually really cool. I love the art style and kind of the aesthetic they're going with this game. I think Kay Vance is a super cool looking character. Seems like there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff to learn about her. Nyx is obviously this really awesome companion. Her battle droid companion, it seems like a lot of people are actually thirsty for it, which is like super weird, but okay, whatever, you do you. But he's very interesting, has a cool backstory, and I'm really curious about how that's all going to play out. But check out that fan kit. There's some really good screenshots. There's some really good like wallpapers and stuff like that you could grab onto. I'm very excited for Star Wars Outlaws. I've talked about it before, but I really do believe that I think that this is going to be a big coming out party for Massive, Ubisoft Massive. Obviously Division 1 and 2 were big hits. They sold an insane number of copies, very well liked and very well known. Despite what you may see on the internet, especially Division 2 reviewed extremely well. And while its existing community may be unpleasable and maybe doesn't fully realize how good they have it, Massive's a great studio, and my impression through the Division games was always that, man, this team really seems like they want to make single player story games, and they're kind of stuck making these looter shooter, vague RPG type games, where I've just always felt from conversations I've had with their devs to just seeing the way that they've tried to put story into a genre that doesn't really bode well for stories and looter shooters. And don't give me this Destiny crap. The Destiny story, all their storylines, which I do keep up with, even though I don't care about the game, I still am curious, are sci-fi movie straight to video crap. They're nuts. They have likable characters, I get it, but their stories are actually kind of junk. There's my hot take. And it's just hard to put story in the looter shooter games because it's so restricted. And so I really believe this Star Wars Outlaws game is going to be a big coming out party for Massive, for them to say like, hey, not only can we make maybe some of the best environments in the entire industry, not only can we have some really awesome gameplay mechanics and game feel, we can also have and great graphics and all of that. We can also have a really fun story set in this existing universe that is going to have choices, and you're going to impact what happens in the story. I think this is going to be a big coming out party, and I really hope it leads to more of this kind of thing from Ubisoft Massive. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. Be right back. Okay, so story number 5. Starfield hype and Baldur's Gate 3's impact. So I just kind of wanted to riff on this for a little bit. I've seen obviously a ton of discussion about this over the last couple weeks. And what's interesting about it is that I get that humans are just kind of like this, where it's always about the comparisons. It's always about the this versus that, my thing versus your thing. But there's been a couple interesting conversations going on. A more immediate one being, how has Baldur's Gate 3 impacted what's going to happen with Starfield, whether it's sales or expectations and so on. It should be noted that Baldur's Gate 3 will be releasing on the same day as Starfield on the PlayStation, and obviously Starfield is not coming out on the PlayStation. It's going to be Xbox and PC only, and this has meant it's been taken by a lot of people as like a at least short-term exclusivity deal for PlayStation, because they're having issues with getting the Xbox Series S to work with the split screen, which I still call BS on. Supposedly this game, Baldur's Gate 3, works at least moderately well on Steam Deck, which is like 1/5 the power of a Series S. So if you're able to get all your features to work on the Steam Deck, you should absolutely be able to get them to work on the Series S. I think there's a lack of motivation to develop it for the S, which actually is the more is the bigger explanation, but that's just my little conspiracy theory. Anyways, I think that there's this weird implication that people have been like, oh, Baldur's Gate 3 is going to kill all the hype for Starfield, and people are going to be unsatisfied with Starfield now. And I think that's like really weird. One, because like it's really odd to me that people are being so like sitting on Bethesda so hard here. Like I don't think people realize that Bethesda, their bad games are still really good. Like Fallout 4 by a lot of Bethesda fans is considered to be mid at best. And it had like almost a 90 Metacritic score. Like Fallout 4 is a really good game. It just wasn't a really good Bethesda game. But it's still as good, if not better, than almost any RPG that's come out since. Like it's still very good if you look at it, you know, in a smaller scale. And I just really, I think it's so odd that people think that like this Baldur's Gate thing, honestly, in my opinion, is it's the rising tide raises all boats kind of thing. Like I think that all of this attention on RPGs and really in-depth worlds and gameplay mechanics and stuff, those are things that Starfield is going to have. Like I said before, there may be some things where, you know, Baldur's Gate 3 is more complicated or more complete in some ways than Starfield, but I suspect Starfield, it'll go both ways. And a really big thing that I think people aren't realizing is that Starfield is this like open world, really in-depth, giant, epic RPG. It's gonna have all these little mechanics and relationships and choices and all of that, and you know, skill checks and things like that. But it's also gonna have shooting. It's also gonna have first-person shooting. And the simple fact is that there's a reason games like Call of Duty come out almost every year and are very similar to every year, but they still sell like hotcakes because people like shooters. And the simple fact is that Baldur's Gate 3 is a turn-based combat game that, while it's implemented extremely well, and even though I don't like those games, I've come to enjoy it a little bit. I would still prefer if Baldur's Gate 3 was a more traditional style, or at least like a hybrid, you know, real-time action type of game. But I just don't think people realize that Starfield has so many positives that, and it's just in the pedigree of Bethesda and stuff like that. I think it's weird. I think this is only going to help. And I really think that Baldur's Gate 3 coming out a month before Starfield is going to give people, especially even like me, a month to finish at least one run of Baldur's Gate 3 and then be excited for a new experience. It's going to be probably similar in scope, right? It's really, but the naysayers on Starfield who have been like praising Baldur's Gate, it's just so interesting to me because, like, you know, they've been developing Starfield for like almost 10 years, you know, like, and it's, you know, and it's Todd Howard and it's Bethesda, and everyone always points to Fallout 76, and it's like, yeah. I mean, that was like kind of a joint project between them and another team, and it was kind of a spinoff, and it was kind of an experimental thing to see if they could make multiplayer work in their ancient engine, and it didn't work very well, even though it seems to be a lot better now. I just, you have to look back to Fallout 4 and Fallout 3 and Skyrim, and you have to look at these games, and it's the same people making this game. And honestly, the fact that it's a new IP, the fact that they've spent so much time on it, the fact that they were willing to delay it a whole year almost, you know, all of these things, I believe it's a formula that Starfield is almost guaranteed to be a very good game. Again, like I said before, but can it hit that amazing, level? And that's what we're waiting to find out. But this whole rivalry thing that just isn't real. And thinking that like, oh, now Starfield's gonna get sunk because of Baldur's Gate 3. Like, people just need to realize that, in my opinion at least, Starfield has a better chance of being as good, if not better, than Baldur's Gate 3 than it doesn't. It just, yeah, like Starfield's facial animations on characters is not going to be as good, sure, but it may do 100 other things just as well, if not better. So I hope that they're both 95 Metacritic score games or more, and that they compete real hard with Tears of the Kingdom for Game of the Year. And instead of the opposite, instead of hoping that one or the other fails, I hope they both succeed. Another small conversation that I've seen going on especially as I've gotten more into the BioWare community, is that there's a lot of interesting thoughts about how the Dragon Age Dreadwolf devs must be feeling about the reaction to Baldur's Gate 3, and that, that in theory there's some pressure on them to put out a game that is similarly deep, knowing that the Dragon Age games are kind of the spiritual successors to the Baldur's Gate games. If you don't remember, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 were made by BioWare and were kind of some of the establishing work of what led to Dragon Age and Mass Effect and things like that. There may be a more direct connection there, but even then, like, from some leaks, we're expecting Dragon Age Dreadwolf to not be like a turn-based, isometric game or whatever. That it will likely be potentially maybe a game that's more action oriented, and is even being supposedly said to be kind of like a God of War style combat game that has a bunch of RPG mechanics and choices and things like that. So it. And then there's the even further off conversation of how Baldur's Gate may impact Mass Effect. Now, that's a more legit conversation, in my opinion, because Dragon Age Dreadwolf is likely like feature and content complete right now. They're just getting time to bug fix and tighten it up and do all the things they need to do. So that means that they probably they may be able to implement some tiny things that they're inspired from by Baldur's Gate into Dreadwolf, but likely that game's so far along that it's probably not very flexible. Now, on the other hand, Mass Effect, the next Mass Effect 4, Mass Effect Next, whatever we want to call it, is likely plenty far off for a bunch of the game designers and the other developers to look at things that Baldur's Gate 3 has done that people like. And the thing is, it's not just, they won't just copy it, or at least they hopefully won't. But it's not about copying it. It's not even about trying to do the exact same thing, because it won't work. They're two different types of RPGs. But it's seeing why people love these things. I think that's the tough part, and that's the essential part, is for these devs to pay attention to not the exact feature that fans are such a fan of, or the exact mechanics, but kind of the why do they like those things, and trying to suss that out so that in your own game, in your own systems, and its own mechanics, you can try to suss out that same why without necessarily being the exact same mechanic. So I think this whole conversation is a little silly about the one's going to hurt the other. I think that these will all help each other, and they're just going to make RPGs more relevant and in the regular conversation more. And hopefully it leads to some more games like this and to higher quality and so on and so forth. So, okay. Story number 5, or whatever this one is. This is probably 6, I think. I can't remember. The Division 2 Year 5 Season 1 thoughts. And so we had the Season 1 of Year 5 of the Division wrap up last week, and it was fine. The big thing about this, from a story and lore perspective, I thought it was kind of boring and kind of unfulfilling. But what they're doing is they're setting up a bunch of stuff for, I assume, the end of this season when the new DLC comes out and things like that. So I can appreciate it for those reasons. I found that this switch up that they've done, where their seasons typically were based around a manhunt, and so you would have this target that for the season you were going after, and every 3 weeks they would release a new lieutenant. So you'd have to kill their 4 lieutenants, and that would give you all of the information you needed to find the main manhunt target. And then you would have a modified mission in the game that you would go into, and you would fight this target, and then you would complete the season, at least from a story standpoint. And I found those loops to be pretty good, and they've been pretty solid in recent seasons and years. This one switched it up, where instead of having a manhunt target, you had a rescue target, which meant that you rescued 4 people over a few months, and then they gave you all the information you needed to save the main person. And I get it. I like that they're trying to switch it up. I like what they're doing here. It just, I don't know. It just wasn't as exciting. And in my opinion, it just wasn't. And I really don't feel like the story they're setting up seems really, really cool. The actual stories they told were just fine, I guess. So I was a little disappointed with the season, but I do think it's going to lead to some really interesting ones. I'm still not super excited about season 2 either. It will have an incursion, which is like a mini raid, which I am excited about. And supposedly people who have gotten to play test it have been very positive about it. I have not seen that firsthand, so take that for what it's worth. But it's really interesting seeing. I'm not as in touch with the Division community as I was at one point, and it's really interesting seeing, especially some content creators' takes on, like, a lot of content creators seem like absolutely positive there's going to be like a year 6 for the Division 2. And it's possible. They're still expanding their team. We found out last week that Petter, I believe his last name was Martinson, I should know that, but he used to be one of the kind of the comm dev people back in the day when the Division 1 and even Division 2 had state of the game every week. One of the people who was a mainstay in that crew was Petter. It was Yannick, Petter, and Hamish. And then as time went on, other people were involved as well. And Petter coming back, he's been working on some other stuff. He's been doing, he started like a podcast that Massive does where it's one-on-one podcast with developers in their studio. It's very interesting, as well as a series of videos where one of their community devs just shows kind of day-to-day life in a big AAA studio and in this like hyper modern studio they just built. And so it's cool to have Petter back. It definitely makes me happy. So now we have Petter and Yannick. All we have left is we need to pull in Hamish again and have the triumvirate or whatever it is back together. Hamish is no longer with Ubisoft. He's with another company, another studio. But we can all hope one day we can pull him back in, maybe for Division 3. But for year 6, I still, with Division 2, I don't think there's a year 6. I think there's even an implication in the roadmap of year 5 in the final season. It implies that they're going to do, it says something along the lines of like a seasonal reboot or something. And what I assume that's going to be, my thought, is they're going to implement a system where they can replay all of the seasons from the last 4 or 5 years and be able to put in modifiers and do things to make replaying those seasons more interesting. The Division 1 replays all of its seasons as well, and their global events and stuff like that, but they're exactly the same as they've been since they came out. Where I suspect what they're going to do is try to put Division 2 into kind of a retirement mode that still gives some new content, maybe some new rewards, some modified versions of previous content. And then I think they're going to start on pre-production of Division 3, because I imagine this is all going to happen around the same time that Star Wars Outlaws releases. Star Wars Outlaws has most of the Division 2 team on it, and I suspect that once they finish that game, they'll be moving on to make Division 3. I'm still pretty confident in that. It seems like a lot of people think that Division 3 is a dream. I don't think it is. I think it's a borderline assumption at this point, but maybe I'm wrong. We will have to wait and see. But season 5 or season 1, year 5 was okay. I think season 3 and 4 are probably going to be the real bangers. But 2 has definitely some features I'm excited about. Second to last story here, Destiny 2 announces Keith David as Zavala's voice actor. So after the passing of Lance Reddick, that was really odd. He, I believe, passed away of a heart attack, even though he was not very old and he was in like really good shape. And, literally one of the like kind of weirdest and one of the like kind of saddest things I've seen people post was after he passed, people on the Destiny subreddit who were friends with him on whatever PlayStation or Xbox, whatever he played, had noticed that literally like the night before he passed away, he was playing Destiny. Like this guy Lance Reddick was someone who really lived the character and like was a legitimate part of his community and actually played the game he voices in and things like that. And so his death was obviously really tragic. I think there was a lot of worry or confusion about how Destiny was going to handle his passing. His character Zavala, from my relatively limited Destiny knowledge, is a mainstay in the series and is like the main quest giver and kind of the kind of leader in many ways of the groups that you're a part of. And I'm sure some people felt like, and even I to a point felt like it would be kind of weird to continue on that character without such an iconic voice actor. But they pulled in Keith David. If you don't know who he is, he's been a ton of things and a ton of properties, both on film and in video games. My reference for him is Anderson in the Mass Effect series. And so he probably is one of the only acceptable replacements for Reddick. It's going to be interesting, how they transition to him, but they've already said they won't be re-recording any of Zavala's old lines, that they'll be using everything from Lance Reddick they can, but they will be moving forward with Keith David. And even though maybe getting rid of the character could have been the right move, it also seems like it would have been a pretty insane rewrite to make that happen. And it seems like they're treating it respectfully. And I think that's all people can ask. So then the final topic here is actually about this podcast. So I've been talking about this on the Discord. If you aren't part of that, please join. You can check out the Linktree link down in the description, or check out my Twitter accounts and stuff. Get in there and get into the conversation. I'm going to rebrand the podcast. The identity of this podcast, I feel like, is still really wrapped up in The Division. The term The Echo Cast is referencing the echoes in the Division games, which are these kind of like flashback things. They're these like compilations of data that you kind of would collect and see what happened in these situations that were recorded by security cameras and cell phones and so on. And back when I switched the podcast from being a Division podcast to a more general podcast in gaming, as you can even see if you're watching this video or if you've seen the branding, like the Echo, or all of my branding used to be the Division Orange, and then when I switched, I think I went to blue, and then I've been on green for quite a while, and that was always to try to kind of get away from that, like, you would see the Echo, you'd see the orange, and just assume it's a Division podcast. I tried to generalize it more than that, and I think that's kind of run its course to a point. I don't think, like, if you just see the Echo Cast, you don't really know what that means. Like, okay, like, what is that? I even added to my podcast name a video game podcast to try to make it clear what it was. And I just think at this point, the podcast isn't a Division podcast anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. And I think it would make sense to maybe kind of have a fresh start. And so my plan is, by the 250th episode, which is only 2 episodes away, is to have a rebranding plan in mind, probably a new name of the podcast. To do that, I'm open to ideas. I'm brainstorming myself. I'm trying to figure some things out on my side to figure out what may look good and sound good and be representative. I want to try to include, I think about what this podcast is. It's about video games. It has a focus on The Division and Mass Effect and probably Starfield soon and things like that. Even Baldur's Gate 3 at this point. But I'm a solo podcast. That's a fairly unique thing. I have always tried to sell it as, I'm a small podcast and I'm a single person. I'm one individual solo podcaster. That means that, community interaction and listener interaction is supremely important, because it's the main feedback and the main way we can kind of go back and forth. And I just don't think the current branding and vibe around the podcast really supports that. So if you have any ideas or any opinions or thoughts about a change at all, or what we could change it to, or maybe some inspiring thoughts, please hit me up, either on my Twitter at Bondiesel, at the EchoCast, in my Discord. Again, you can get the link in the link tree, over on Instagram or Threads, or in the YouTube comments of this video, or anywhere. Give me your feedback. I'd be really interested. Okay, let's move on to some listener questions. If you have your own question, be sure to use the Google form questionnaire, ask in my Discord, in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on Twitter at Bondiesel or at the EchoCast. I missed Master Prime's questions last week, so I kind of combined them here, and we're going to do kind of a rapid fire thing here because I need to go get ready for my daughter's birthday party. So Master Prime asked, has your opinion changed on turn-based combat? This is in reference to Baldur's Gate 3, I assume, and it has changed just a little. As I've learned how it works, I'm understanding mechanics a little bit more. I'm still not as creative as you really need to be with this stuff. I'm finding it tolerable at this point, even though I still don't love it. And then the follow-up to this was, would I try others? Probably not. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is the type of game that the rest of the game is so good, I'm willing to tolerate this one part of it. It's very similar to my feelings on The Division. I love the Division games. I love the gameplay, the story, the lore, the environments, all of that. I actually don't like the looter part of it. I think that it takes away from the game quite a bit. So oddly enough, some of my favorite games are games that I really dislike one of the core parts of those games. Master Prime continues here. How do you think content creators will tackle Starfield? I don't know. I think games like Baldur's, these RPGs that are story based, Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, when Dragon Age comes out, when the next Mass Effect comes out, they're weird games for content creators, in my opinion, because so much of the fan base doesn't want spoilers. So you have to be careful making gameplay videos or streams and things like that. Really, I think the best things to do are to make videos about, like, here's how you do this thing. Like, so if you run across something that is somewhat challenging, I've been seeing this with Baldur's Gate 3 especially, that you make a quick video about, hey, have you been trying to do this? Well, here's how you do it. Or if there's a story beat, or if there's a character that crops up that is really interesting, doing a video focused on that, where I think at least at first, you're going to find a lot of people don't want to watch playthroughs and stuff like that. Now, with this game being exclusive from PlayStation, you may have some content that maybe that would be workable, where you're going to have people who are saying, like, I'm not buying a PC, I don't feel like buying an Xbox, I'll watch someone stream this game, or I'll watch their playthrough videos. And maybe that's where that can play. At the end of the day, how do I think they're going to tackle it? I think you're going to see content creators doing everything. They're going to be streaming. They're going to be trying to do worlds first. Who can beat it first? Who can, discover the most secrets first? Who can do all this stuff? I think it's going to be a deluge of activity. It's going to be a ton of crappy content probably, but definitely some diamonds in the rough, I'm sure. I don't think people realize what kind of freaks Bethesda fans are, including myself. So I'm definitely excited to make some content myself about it, and to see what other people are going to do with it. Next question from Master Prime: did Baldur's Gate 3 gain praise due to its nudity? I think its willingness to be an adult game definitely attracted some people to it, including myself. I don't necessarily care about seeing pixel boobies and stuff like that. It's fine. I mean, I don't, like, it's not real. Like, and I'm a married man in my mid 30s. It's not like this is my first boob I've ever seen. So, it's not like that's like a huge draw to me, but to me, it's just the implication that the game is going to treat its players like adults, and that it's going to address adult relationships and themes and stuff like that. That's what the nudity always implied to me, and that's why I actually liked it, even though I don't really care about the nudity itself. In fact, it's like a little bit comical at times, depending on the situation. Next question is, what era would you like to see the next Battlefield be in? I want to see them continue the near future take, especially if it means they're going to slowly approach a Battlefield 2042 or 2142 sequel or reboot or something, because that game was so cool, because it was there were like mechs and these big like these big like air harriers, and just this like really advanced tech that was still really grounded, and it was very cool. I'm hoping that and the rumors are that the next Battlefield is going to take place just not too long after 2042. So I don't know if it's going to be like 2100 or something that they'll do, so they'll be able to start showing us some of those more advanced tech things, because even in Battlefield 4 they started showing some of the future tech. The one of the maps of Battlefield 4 was like a prototype build location for one of the giant ships that is in 2142. And so I'm hoping that they're going to kind of continue that vibe of, and hopefully the next Battlefield game just focuses on being a Battlefield game and isn't so concerned about trying to be everything else. But it would be really cool if they try to split the difference between 2042 and 2142. Drop something right in the middle there and let us, deal with a little bit more future stuff, but still have like AKs, because AK-47s are going to be used for the next 200 years probably. And then Master Prime's final question: should the Switch 2 exist? Yeah, it has to. It's way past due in my opinion. I've had the maybe somewhat controversial opinion that Nintendo games shouldn't get the pass they get for looking so awful and running so badly, and for the Switch not being able to get basically any third-party games on it. I understand that it's on the devs' fault that their games kind of look bad and run bad and stuff like that. But it is Nintendo's fault. Nintendo, I think I said it recently in another podcast, like they literally sit on games for years that are done just so they can release them at the time that they're going to make the most money. And that's fine. They're a business. The point for them is to make money. But if you make your product, if you allow it to be kind of subpar in some big ways just for profits, I think that sucks. It's going to happen. Nothing's going to change. Because I suspect the new Switch is going to be based on, like, they probably could have released it 2 years ago. And that means that it's probably going to be outdated the day it comes out. And then they're going to be in the same boat they were before. But here's the thing. The Switch has sold like 150 million units. Nintendo doesn't care. Nintendo doesn't care if it's behind, doesn't care if things look bad and run bad, because more than likely the Switch 2 is going to be outdated almost as soon as it releases. And Nintendo doesn't care because it's probably going to sell 100 million units still. Like, it's just, Nintendo has that power. They have that fan base. They have, all those things. It's just, it doesn't matter. So Switch 2 should exist. I'm hoping to get one. I missed out on the Switch, and in the last 2 or 3 years, I just refuse to buy that outdated, crappy tech. And so I'm hoping that this new one is more relevant, and I am looking to get it because I suspect the little one is going to be getting into games sooner than later. And there's a bunch of Nintendo games I've missed out on basically since like the N64 that I would love to dive back into. Okay, we have a question here from Anna. Do content creators have a responsibility for their community when all they do is fuel negativity against the game or a studio? She kind of specified, and I kind of summarized here, specific creators who focus on negativity without anything constructive or useful, with an attitude of like an armchair dev. Yeah, I absolutely think content creators are responsible for their communities. One thing that's really that I've noticed in the last few months, I've been browsing on Reddit, the r/popular, the popular subreddit. So it's not actually a subreddit. It's actually just all of the most popular posts every day get put into this subreddit. And one, I kept coming across this one particular extremely large, well-known streamer. His subreddit, as well as a couple others, would pop up, and every single time I would click into the comments, whatever the topic was, it was always the most vile, like racist, bigoted, everything phobic, just these like really toxic, really just super disgusting people. And the creator themselves is somewhat controversial, but not that bad. Like, at least not that I've seen. Like, they're like kind of a douchebag, but like I've never seen them express this stuff like explicitly. But then you see that in every single time you would click into their subreddit's post, just the most vile stuff you've ever seen. And obviously you can't judge, like I said before, about the whole thing with Baldur's Gate 3 developer panicky stuff. I don't want to try to imply that every single person in their community is like this, but you are kind of what you reap a little bit. And I think that creators, especially creators who have kind of given up and have just decided to become these toxic dirtbags because it is profitable. It's what Anna says in her message, and that I've seen it happen 100 times in the Division community, but now even in the Mass Effect community and others, where you see these content creators, they have a voice and they want to make videos, and they'll make some build videos and kind of some, kind of lighthearted commentary on the game and stuff. And it seems like everyone hits a crossroad where they can go down one path, where they continue trying to grind it out and make fairly positive videos and constructive stuff and never get too clickbaity and things like that. Or they can go the other way, where they become hyper negative, hyper toxic, super clickbaity. And the honest truth is that path is way easier. It's easy to get anger clicks on the internet, and it's really hard to get happy clicks on the internet. And so if you aren't willing to fully sell out to negativity, you're going to have a tough time with making content, whether it's streaming or videos or whatever. The Division community is notorious for this, where you'll have this little streamer, this little content creator, start to get a little bit of attention, and just like 99% of the time, they realize that if they just go full toxic, there's a built-in fan base for that, and people can't wait and will just jump all over it. And there's a bunch of content creators even today in the Division community who are these like the most toxic, awful human beings you could ever interact with. And they weren't always like that. At one point they were decent, and now they're not. And it's because they sold out. And fine, that's their choice, but it sucks. It's awful in my opinion, but here we are. So yes, I do believe content creators are responsible for their communities to a point. YouTube's asked a question here, said, Mass Effect question, when it comes to squad customization, team selection, cosmetics, armor, weapons, skills, bonuses, what do you feel are the must-haves, should-haves, and nice-to-haves for the next Mass Effect to not only keep up with the bar set in previous Mass Effects, but also in the games made by the time it releases? I mean, this is one where I do kind of think the like Baldur's Gate 3 thing hopefully will impact choices they make. Mass Effect Andromeda, and I believe even Dragon Age Inquisition and likely Dreadwolf seem to be following this path where like your companions are like you can't really do much with them or to them. Andromeda being the game I have the most experience with, you can't even like direct them to do things other than move. And like, I just really hated it because their AI sucks. And so that is a bummer. But like something that was always so fun about the Mass Effect games, the trilogy, was that even though they weren't turn-based, you could use, like your teammates' powers and stuff like that, and kind of make it like a hybrid turn-based game. Because when you go to select the powers, time stops, and you can set up multiple things to happen at once, and then it all happens at once. That's actually something I wish was in Baldur's Gate. I wish that you could queue up multiple actions by your whole party to all happen at once, rather than the like completely turn-based action that we've ended up getting. And so I think a must-have is, and I don't even have any should or nice to haves. I think having full control of your team selection, their cosmetics, their armor, their weapons, their skills, their bonuses. I think we should have complete control of all of that. And I really hope that that's something that they can get to, because I think that's been one of my favorite things about Baldur's Gate 3 is just that complete control. So we'll see. And that's where we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening. I'm happy for any feedback on the show or anything else. Obviously, like I talked about the rebrand, please let me know what you think about it in general. If you have any of your own ideas and any of the places where you can contact me, please do it. You can find me all over the internet as Bon Diesel, including over on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and on Twitch. Where I do stream on Twitch a few times a week, so please come check me out over there. I would love to be able to chat live. If you want to support my content, check out patreon.com/BonDiesel, subscribe over at Twitch, or check out my merch at the link in the bottom of the description. It's the Linktree link. That's all I have for this one, so until next time. Thank you.